The Woman with Two Skins, Part 1. Nigerian Folk Tale. Iyamba I. Of Calabar was a very powerful king. He fought and conquered all the surrounding countries, killing all the old men and women, but the able-bodied men and girls he caught and brought back as slaves, and they worked on the farms until they died. This king had 200 wives, but none of them had borne a son to him. His subjects, seeing that he was becoming an old man, begged him to marry one of the spider's daughters, as they always had plenty of children, but when the king saw the spider's daughter he did not like her, as she was ugly, and the people said it was because her mother had had so many children at the same time. However, in order to please his people he married the ugly girl, and placed her among his other wives, but they all complained because she was so ugly, and said she could not live with them. The king, therefore, built her a separate house for herself, where she was given food and drink the same as the other wives. Everyone jeered at her on account of her ugliness, but she was not really ugly, but beautiful, as she was born with two skins, and at her birth her mother was made to promise that she should never remove the ugly skin until a certain time arrived save only during the night, and that she must put it on again before dawn. Now the king's head wife knew this, and was very fearful lest the king should find it out and fall in love with the spider's daughter, so she went to a juju man and offered him 200 rods to make a potion that would make the king forget altogether that the spider's daughter was his wife. This the juju man finally consented to do, after much haggling over the price, for 350 rods, and he made up some medicine, which the head wife mixed with the king's food. For some months this had the effect of making the king forget the spider's daughter, and he used to pass quite close to her without recognizing her in any way. When 4 months had elapsed and the king had not once sent for Adiaha, for that was the name of the spider's daughter, she began to get tired, and went back to her parents. Her father, the spider, then took her to another juju man, who, by making spells and casting lots, very soon discovered that it was the king's head wife who had made the juju and had enchanted the king so that he would not look at Adiaha. He therefore told the spider that Adiaha should give the king some medicine which he would prepare, which would make the king remember her. He prepared the medicine, for which the spider had to pay a large sum of money, and that very day Adiaha made a small dish of food, into which she had placed the medicine, and presented it to the king. Directly he had eaten the dish his eyes were opened and he recognized his wife, and told her to come to him that very evening. So in the afternoon, being very joyful, she went down to the river and washed, and when she returned she put on her best cloth and went to the king's palace. Directly it was dark and all the lights were out she pulled off her ugly skin, and the king saw how beautiful she was, and was very pleased with her, but when the cock crowed Adiaha pulled on her ugly skin again, and went back to her own house. This she did for 4 nights running, always taking the ugly skin off in the dark, and leaving before daylight in the morning. In course of time, to the great surprise of all the people, and particularly of the king's 200 wives, she gave birth to a son, but what surprised them most of all was that only one son was born, whereas her mother had always had a great many children at a time, generally about 50. The king's head wife became more jealous than ever when Adiaha had a son, so she went again to the juju man, and by giving him a large present induced him to give her some medicine which would make the king sick and forget his son, and the medicine would then make the king go to the juju man, who would tell him that it was his son who had made him sick, as he wanted to reign instead of his father. The juju man would also tell the king that if he wanted to recover he must throw his son away into the water. And the king, when he had taken the medicine, went to the juju man, who told him everything as had been arranged with the head wife. But at first the king did not want to destroy his son. Then his chief subjects begged him to throw his son away, and said that perhaps in a year's time he might get another son. So the king at last agreed, and threw his son into the river, at which the mother grieved and cried bitterly. Then the head wife went again to the juju man and got more medicine, which made the king forget Adiaha for 3 years, during which time she was in mourning for her son. She then returned to her father, and he got some more medicine from his juju man, which Adiaha gave to the king, and the king knew her and called her to him again, and she lived with him as before. Now the juju who had helped Adiaha's father, the spider, was a water juju, and he was ready when the king threw his son into the water, and saved his life and took him home and kept him alive, and the boy grew up very strong. After a time Adiha gave birth to a daughter, and her the jealous wife also persuaded the king to throw away. It took a longer time to persuade him, but at last he agreed, and threw his daughter into the water too, and forgot Adiha again. But the water juju was ready again, and when he had saved the little girl, he thought the time had arrived to punish the action of the jealous wife, so he went about amongst the head young men and persuaded them to hold a wrestling match in the marketplace every week. This was done, and the water juju told the king's son, who had become very strong, and was very like to his father in appearance, that he should go and wrestle, and that no one would be able to stand up before him. It was then arranged that there should be a grand wrestling match, to which all the strongest men in the country were invited, and the king promised to attend with his head wife. On the day of the match the water juju told the king's son that he need not be in the least afraid, and that his juju was so powerful, that even the strongest and best wrestlers in the country would not be able to stand up against him for even a few minutes. All the people of the country came to see the great contest, to the winner of which the king had promised to present prizes of cloth and money, and all the strongest men came. When they saw the king's son, whom nobody knew, they laughed and said, "Who is this small boy? He can have no chance against us." But when they came to wrestle, they very soon found that they were no match for him. The boy was very strong indeed, beautifully made and good to look upon, and all the people were surprised to see how like he was to the king. To be continued.